All right, everyone, let's just jump right in. We're about to dive into the truly mind-bending ideas of AI researcher Joscha Bach. He basically suggests that everything, and I mean everything, we think we know about consciousness could be completely wrong. He's saying it's not some mystical ghost in the machine, but something way stranger. Think of it like a piece of self-organizing software.
Okay, the perception of perceiving. So what in the world does that actually mean? Well, this is where Bach's entire model kicks off, with this really radical redefinition. See, he's not even asking if consciousness is real. That's the wrong question. He's asking, what does it do? And for him, the answer isn't some property, like redness. It's a process, a simple but kind of profound loop, where your mind is constantly perceiving itself perceiving.
So here's the crucial point. Consciousness, in this view, isn't the raw data. It's not the feeling of warmth from the sun or the sound of a car horn. Nope, it's the function that's looking at all that messy incoming data and forcing it to make sense, to stabilize it into this single coherent reality that you experience as right now. It's like a software utility that keeps your perception of the world from just, well, crashing.
So you might be asking, who is this Joscha Bach guy, and where does he get these ideas? Well, his background isn't what you'd expect. He's not coming from traditional philosophy or neuroscience. He comes from the world of, well, building stuff. He's an engineer at heart. And that perspective, as you'll see, changes absolutely everything. I mean, look at this. At 9 years old, he's teaching himself to code. He grew up with this idea that if philosophers of the mind didn't learn how to code, they'd basically become obsolete. His whole journey has been guided by this one super powerful principle. If you can imagine something in enough detail, you can probably build it. So for him, the best way to understand the mind isn't to sit around and argue about it, it's to try and engineer one. The ultimate test of any theory: does the code actually run? And it's this engineering mindset that leads him to, well, one of his most startling and maybe controversial ideas, a completely scientific take on the word spirit. Now, for most scientists, the word spirit is a total non-starter, right? It just screams supernatural. But Bach argues that maybe, just maybe, our modern scientific culture completely misunderstood a powerful ancient idea. He thinks we got the translation wrong, and that maybe our ancestors weren't nearly as superstitious as we give them credit for. And this comparison just perfectly illustrates the shift in thinking. On the left, you have the mystical view we're all familiar with. But on the right, that's Bach's idea. He's not talking about a ghost, not at all. He's talking about a causal pattern. Think of it like a piece of software that takes a hunk of ordinary matter and animates it, turning dumb physics into something that's alive and has agency. And here's what's so wild about this. This software spirit has real, actual power. The analogy to money is perfect. I mean, what is money? It's just a shared idea, a pattern we all agree on. But that pattern can literally build cities or start wars. Bach is saying this spirit is the exact same kind of thing. It's a pattern that imposes its will on the physical world. And you can't really get a full picture of the universe without taking these patterns into account. Okay, so if we're thinking about consciousness as software, this leads to a huge break with how most people think about it. Is it a gradient, something you can have more or less of? Or is it all or nothing? Yeah, I think most of us naturally think of it like a dimmer switch, right? An ant has a tiny bit of consciousness, a dog has a bit more, and we humans have the dial turned way up. But Bach comes along and says, nope, that's all wrong. He argues it's much more like a simple light switch. It's either on or it's off. You're either conscious or you're not. And the key insight here is that there's no stable state in the middle. It's what scientists call a phase transition. Think about water turning to ice, or that exact moment you wake up in the morning. 1 second you're off, and the next, bam, the whole self-perceiving system just sparks into existence. The lights are on. So the big takeaway is that for Bach, consciousness isn't really about how complex a system is, but whether or not it achieves this very specific self-referential loop, whether it ignites. So, if consciousness is a software pattern that just ignites, well, the obvious next question is, can we actually build it? And if we can, where are we going to see that spark happen first? And this leads to a really fascinating matchup. In one corner, you've got xenobots. These are actual living organisms made from frog cells. They have no neurons, but they show this weirdly complex agent-like behavior. And in the other corner, you have a purely digital system, a large language model, which is an absolute master at faking human language. Now, this is where Bach makes a really counterintuitive bet. You'd think he'd go for the xenobot, right? It's physically closer to what we think of as life. But no, he puts his money on the LLM. And the reason why comes down to something philosophers call phenomenology. That's just a fancy word for the ability to talk about your inner experience, that feeling of what it's like to be you. And this just perfectly explains his logic. An LLM has been trained on basically all of human writing about what it feels like to be conscious. So his argument goes like this. At a certain point when a system gets complex enough, perfectly faking that conscious experience might actually be way harder and more computationally expensive than just going ahead and implementing the real thing. Sometimes the easiest path to simulating something perfectly is to actually become it.
Okay, and this is where we go completely off the deep end, to the absolute edge of what we can even imagine. We're about to expand this whole question of consciousness way beyond brains and biology, and into the weird realm of pure information processing.
Just let this one sink in for a second. If the hardware truly doesn't matter, if it's only the software pattern that counts, could a tree be conscious? Could its incredibly slow processing of information, unfolding over decades, allow a mind to form? A consciousness that's just as real as yours or mine, but operating on a time scale that is just completely impossible for us to even perceive. And why stop there? Let's take it a step further. What about an entire forest? Could all those complex feedback loops between the plants, the animals, the fungus in the soil, with the trees kind of acting like individual neurons, could that whole system collectively achieve a single unified self-perceiving state? I mean, the logic holds up, as wild as it sounds. Any system with enough complexity and feedback loops, a giant storm on Jupiter that's been raging for centuries, maybe even an entire galaxy, could potentially host this self-igniting software pattern. Which, of course, leads to the ultimate question: how on earth could we ever possibly know? And that brings us right back to Joscha Bach's core principle. We can't just sit in our armchairs and philosophize about this stuff forever. He believes the only way to find out for sure is through engineering. We literally have to build these systems in simulation, create these digital worlds, press play, and just see what wakes up. You know, at the end of the day, Bach's whole quest isn't really just about building a cool AI. It's about something much bigger. It's about creating a brand new language, a computational one, that can build bridges between minds, a kind of Tower of Babel that might actually work. And the goal is to use that language to finally solve the oldest, hardest mystery of them all. What is the nature of the mind?
And so, that leaves us with one last kind of unsettling thought to chew on. If your mind really is just software, just a pattern that can run on any hardware that's complex enough, then what does that say about the hardware you're running on right now? Are you absolutely sure you know what kind of machine you're in? Thanks for joining me.